So a couple days ago, we put up a video about the dreaded penta-bloated corpse build, and it seems like you guys enjoyed that quite a bit, and it really just brought me back to the days of old, the days of the memes, just these terrible units, just having a good time with them. And on that note, guys, this video is actually going to be talking about the worst unit for every single faction in Total War Warhammer 2. So without further ado, guys, let us begin with the High Elf. So I think that the worst unit on the High Elf roster is the Ilthamar Chariot. This is something that in all the ECLs I've cast and different things like that, I don't think I've ever seen this bad boy used, and I've never really had the itch to use it. I just feel like for 1100, a chariot that doesn't have good armor piercing values, I think it has 54 weapon strength overall. It does have a nice bonus for its infantry, but its AP values are very low. And basically, when you pay for these big, premium chariots like the Razorgore chariots and things like that, and the Chaos Scorbeast chariot, you're paying for that nice armor piercing, like something that can just punch through Chosen, can punch through heavily armored greatswords, all that kind of good stuff. And I feel like paying the 1100 for this bad boy just sucks. And if you're going to be wanting something to clear out chaff, like something that lacks AP, why not just pay a little bit less? The 850 on the Tyrannoch chariot, you get some missile attacks. It's going to be a little bit more efficient. Granted, I don't think either of them are good choices because the High Elves can just bring a noble on a chariot, which is just more optimal in pretty much every way. As such, I do think that this bad boy, the Ilthamar chariot, is going to be the worst unit on the High Elf roster. So number 2, guys, we're going to be going to the glorious Lizardmen Empire, and for the unit we're going to be picking, it's going to be the Ark of SOTEK. So the Ark of SOTEK, definitely an ambitious little lizard here, but he just, for 1,000 gold, you're paying 350 more than a regular Bastillodon for a really terrible Haggard ability. It just seems to do, minuscule damage. I mean, it can do okay damage against like lightning armor chaff, but you have to have the perfect positioning. Your opponents can react and get out before it gets its full duration. You're spending so much extra money on this Ark of SOTEK when it's just, it's pretty much useless in my opinion. So I do think the Ark of SOTEK is the worst unit on the Lizardman roster. For 1,000 gold, you're just paying too high of a premium. The ability just sucks. The damage is a little bit lackluster, and yeah, I mean, it does okay against chaff and lightly armored troops. So if your opponent is like, oh look, an Ark of SOTEK, let's blob up with everything, and they send everything after it, yeah, of course it might do okay, but in most competitive player against good competent players, and not against AI, for example, it's going to be quite terrible. Maybe in campaign it can be okay for like bunker busting gates and things like that, but again, I think in general it is one of the worst units on the roster. It was close here. The Razordons were very, very close, the Razordon hunting pack, but I do think the Ark of SOTEK is going to be edging out this bad boy because it's pretty much just always terrible. So the next faction we're going to be talking about are the glorious Dark Elves. And for the Dark Elves, I think the worst unit on the roster are Shades with dual weapons. Now, we're excluding RORs from this video. We're just talking about regular units. But if I was including RORs, I would probably say the Raven's Herald, the repeater crossbows who just run out of ammo and generally suck. But in this case, I think Shades with dual weapons. Now, regular Shades they're pretty good in melee combat as is, right? They have 40 melee attack, 32, 30. I mean, you don't really need the bonus for infantry that much. And Shades with great weapons, I was actually speaking with Felcon about this, and he mentioned that they actually have better hit rates, or they make contact a little bit more efficiently. So they're going to be a better choice for 100 gold more. Plus, you get the AP in melee, which gives them more kind of variance and purpose. So as such, I do think the Shades with dual weapons are going to be one of the worst choices. They're just kind of like a weird, awkward nation. And really, like, if you look at them in a vacuum, some of these units in this video, like, aren't terrible. Like, Shades with dual weapons are okay, but I'm just talking about how, like, in conjunction with the rest of the High Elf roster, they're probably one of the least efficient options, and you're not really going to see them terribly often. Which, some factions just don't really have that many bad units. Like, you'll see later in the video when we talk about the bad units for other factions, like, they're actually not bad units, but just on the Beastmen roster in a vacuum, they're just not as good, and they're probably one of the least efficient picks. So the next faction we're going to be talking about are our glorious Ratsy friends, the Skaven, and this one was a little bit tricky. Now, I was really on the fence about the Warpfire Thrower weapons teams versus the Poison Wind Globadiers teams, but with the advent of the Skaven DLC, I just think that, and they're also actually in this most recent patch, the Hunter and the Beast DLC was a buff to Warpfire Thrower weapons teams. Now, I still think they're a terrible unit, but again, they got a huge damage buff, and they can actually roast infantry somewhat effectively if they're put in an ideal situation. And I have seen people, as a matter of fact, I've seen Aerocrastic use them to pretty good effect against competitive players, and yeah, so the Warpfire Weapons Thrower team I think can be okay, but I think the worst unit on the roster is going to be the Poison Wind Globadiers. These guys just can't hit the broadside of a barn. If your opponent's moving the units, they're just going to miss. You're paying a relatively high premium. I mean, I guess 550 isn't too bad. Now, if your opponent sits still and you're playing against the AI, it's going to be able to do okay in campaign. But against a thinking, moving opponent who's going to react and, be juking you out, Poison Wind Globadiers just suck. On top of that, they turn very slowly. They have slow attack animations. They just are very inaccurate, and they just, with Rattling Gunners coming in, like, there's no point. Rattling Gunners, like, have better range. They hit like absolute trucks in close quarters combat. They have a suppressed mechanic. They have good AP. Rattling Guns are just, even though you're paying more for Rattling Guns, they're just better in every way. And there's really, really no point to bring Poison Wind Globadiers under any circumstances. Like, Skaven just have so many better options for anti-large. Rattling Gunners, they have Jezzails, they have, I mean, maybe Warfire teams, probably not, but. So guys, as such, the worst unit on the Skaven roster is going to be the Poison Wind Globadier. The next unit for today's video is going to be on the Vampire Coast for the Vampire Coast. Let's see these guys. Yes, there they are. I have my little Haggard list here on the computer. I have to dig through it. So for the Vampire Coast, I think the worst unit are going to be deck droppers with bombers. They just, I mean, deck droppers have been nerfed heavily. When Vampire Coast first came out, the handgun variant was pretty impressive, and even the pistol variant was okay. But bombers just like, they've been nerfed. You know, deck droppers have been nerfed in general, but they just suck. Their damage output sucks. You're basically paying $550 for just like slightly like, just like glorified Walmart Fellbats, and their damage output sucks. They don't like mulch infantry like they should, even though it says anti-infantry, special ranged weapon. Well, those things suck. On top of that, their ammo is very low, so if you don't get those like juicy shots, like even in a dream situation, you're like shooting lightly armored troops, you use all their shots, like you might be lucky to actually like take one out. They only have 9 volleys, and they just are terrible. So I recommend avoiding those in multiplayer as well as campaign. They're also quite bad in campaign. There's just better choices. If you are going to go for deck droppers, I think the deck droppers with handguns are probably the best variant because of the range and the AP on those guys. And if you want something to just poke lightly armored troops, just get the 450 deck droppers. At least they're cheaper, and they can actually do some okay damage with their pistols. So again, avoid the bombers. They're terrible in my opinion. And again, everything in this video is my opinion. I may be wrong in many respects, but these are just my experiences and some of the experiences of folks I've talked to about this. So for the next faction, guys, we're going to be talking about the Tomb Kings. So for the Tomb Kings, I think that the worst unit on the roster is going to be the Casket of Souls. You're paying a metric ton for this thing. It's $1250 compared to the $700 for the Screaming Beam Catapult. I mean, it can do okay damage, and it has some okay kind of winds of magic effects with its Covenant of Power, which does get power reserves and a couple other neat things like that. But still, for $1250, I mean, there's so many better choices, like the Shopty Great Bows. Even the Screaming Beam Catapult might be better under certain circumstances. You have the Bone Giant. I mean, just this thing is overpriced. It's just vulnerable. It's an easy target. There's something about it. It just doesn't click for me. Now, there are other units on the Tomb Kings roster, but really, I mean, if you look at the Tomb Kings as a whole, they don't have too many bad units. Like, I'm looking right now through the whole roster, and I mean, maybe the Sepulchral Stalkers, but I do think Sepulchral Stalkers can be situationally useful, whereas the Casket of Souls is just typically not great. Now, there is a circumstance that makes it okay. If you have Grand Hierophant Kotep on it, it can be okay because he brings, you know, getting an artillery piece on him is cool, plus you also can have the Lich Staff. So with Grand Hierophant Kotep, it's okay, and it's not the worst unit, but as a standalone unit, I think the Casket of Souls is the worst unit on this glorious roster. So the next one is going to be the Glorious Empire, the Sons of Sigmar, and you guys probably will see this one coming a million miles away. The War Wagons are a bit of a strange unit. Now, the Hellblaster Black Lions ROR can be pretty good. I think situationally having a Hellblaster that can reposition isn't bad. It's still a little bit overpriced, but hands down the worst unit on this roster is going to be the War Wagon Mortar. This thing is just such an atrocious piece of garbage. It costs $1,100. A regular mortar costs $650, so obviously it costs a lot more. And like whoop-de-doo, you're going to relocate your mortars. It's like the Empire is usually a faction that's being like pursued and pressured, and having something like it's going to get caught. It's like you're basically just paying like an extra premium for a relocating mortar, which is like it's not good. It's just bad. Like it's overcosted. Mortars are very niche anyways. I mean, against Elvish faction, mortars can be quite good against archer play and things like that. But I mean, the War Wagon, why would you ever bring this? I mean, you could pay $650 and just protect it with like spears or halberds or demogryph knights. Like, it's the War Wagon mortar, maybe in like some Haggard kite builds and an alternate dimension, but yeah, it's pretty bad, and you know, it has to be pretty bad to earn this spot. I mean, the Empire does have Hellstorm rocket batteries, which you know, aren't bad in campaign. At least they have some applications. Hellblaster volley guns can be okay situationally as well, but the War Wagon mortar is just a terrible unit. It's just overpriced. You're paying a huge premium for like a Haggard gimmick with your mortar, which is situationally, you know, very, very microscopically useful. So that's going to be the worst unit for the Empire, in my opinion. And now we're going to be talking about the worst unit for the Dwarves. So this one was a little bit tricky. You know, historically, I would probably say Iron Drakes, but now I think I have to say, based on some changes and other variables, it's going to be the Gyro Bomber. So I can't remember the last time in any of my tournaments or casts that I've really seen a Gyro Bomber actually be good. I mean, yes, the bombs can do some okay damage, and it has been relatively buffed recently, if I'm not mistaken, but nonetheless, I still think that the Gyro Bomber of the entire Dwarven roster is probably one of the weaker and least efficient units. So that is going to be it for the Dwarves. Good luck using Gyro Bombers. I mean, I have seen them do some okay work, but you're paying such a high premium. I mean, 1,150 gold. They fly over. You really have to be on point with those bombs. And oftentimes for newer players, the Gyro Bomber can be a bit of a trap, right? Because you're going to be trying to get those perfect bombing runs. You have to click. You really have to aim and get those optimal movement patterns, right? And at the same time, you're going to be missing other things. You're going to be, forsaking your micro in the back line. And yeah, I just think the Gyro Bomber is a bit of a trap. And even in the hands of a really good player, you're just going to be better off bringing like Thunderers or the regular Gyrocopters. The Brimstone guns with 800, which now have a bonus versus large. The Steam Cannon ones are pretty cost efficient at 700. And they also do pretty good damage against light targets. I've also found that the machine gun on the front of the Gyro Bomber, the missile damage one, really just doesn't do that much in general. It seems like it like says it does a ton, right? You look at the missile damage, it's like 1,174, man. That is good stuff, right? But at the end of the day, it just seems lackluster and doesn't really pay for itself. So next, guys, we're going to be talking about the Orcs, the Greenskins, the classic rivals of the Dwarves. Now the greenskins have a couple of really haggard units, like namely the Orc Boar Chariot and things like that, but I think actually the worst unit in terms of cost effectiveness on the greenskin roster are Orc Boar Boys. So Orc Boar Boy Biggins are the anti-large variant. You see them quite a bit. I mean, they are somewhat used, especially the Regiment of Renown, the Broken Test Mod, but the regular Orc Boar Boys just have such pitiful stats. A 22 for their combat stats, which is terrible. 60 speed, 60 leadership, bad armor, just like, they're just so haggard. And for the same cost, you can get Night Goblin Squig Hoppers, which have 82 speed, a relatively similar stat line with poison. They also have a bonus versus infantry like Squig Hoppers, and they're immune to psychology. Like Night Goblin Squig Hoppers are just so much better in every single way than Orc Boar Boys. And the Orc Boar Boys are just, they're slow, they're haggard, their combat stats are terrible, they pretty much lose every engagement, and I think it's a pretty easy decision to say that the Orc Boar Boys are the worst. So that's going to be those poor piggies earning that glorious position. So next we have the Vampire Counts. Now there's a couple contenders. I was on the fence about Hex Wraiths. Hex Wraiths are a unit you almost never see. They're very, very pricey. Their combat stats are relatively low, and a lot of factions are going to have magic to kind of deal with them. Granted, they cause terror and can be situationally okay. Like there are times where they'll slam into the back and cause a terror out, and they bring some AP to the battlefield and fire damage and magic damage. So I think the worst one is going to be the Corpse Cart. This is going to be the 400 gold variant, which is the Corpse Cart with Balefire. Now this thing is just like, it's kind of in an awkward place. Like it has a very strange buff. It does have Vigor Mortis, which isn't bad, but its Balefire buff, it like, the more enemies that are nearby, it like hurts the power recharge rate, and it's slow. It has 23 speed, and it really needs to be in that proper position for it to like get that huge buff, right? So you might as well just bring the Unholy Lodestone, which does have the melee attack and it also heals, or just bring the super cheapo version and just get the buff. Like the 400 gold variant in the middle is just a complete waste in my opinion, and this poor pitiful Corpse Cart, I don't think I don't think it's paid its dues, and it's pretty bad. I mean, Vampire Counts have a couple bad units. The Corpse Cart's really bad. Cryptors are quite pitiful, and also on top of the Hex Race, I think are bad. But really, I just think this Corpse Cart's not like never good. This 400 gold Balefire Corpse Cart. The Cryptors like can be situationally okay, like circumstantially. They've been hit by nerfs just throughout their entire duration of Warhammer. But yeah, it's going to be that Corpse Cart, the Balefire bad boy. So for the next one, guys, we're going to be talking about Norsca, and this one was actually a bit of an eye-opener for me. So I was actually talking to Falcon about this particular pick, and he mentioned that the I never really use Marauder Hunters because Javelins are just so much better in every way, right? They have good range, they do lack AP, but again, their range and their direct arcs of fire and their bonus versus large makes up for that. Plus, there's metal synergies and armor sundering synergies with Famir and other units on the roster. So Marauder Hunters, if you look at the Hunters, they cost 550, which is the same as Javelins. Now, they only have 8 ammunition, which is crazy, like only 8 shots. They run out of ammo, and then you just end up with these like haggard, like kind of infantry. I mean, I guess they do have 36 melee attack, which is isn't bad, but I think Marauder Hunters are the worst unit on the roster. They just like, they have short range, like you're just always going to take the Javelins. Now, for me, it was between the Marauder Hunters or Marauders with great weapons, who just kind of, just seem to get crumped no matter what because of their low melee defense, or the Marauder Hunters. And I think situationally, Marauders with great weapons can be okay against like Dwarves and armored factions like that, or maybe even in the Chaos matchup. But I think Marauder Hunters are just always bad. Javelins are always better. They have better synergies. The bonus versus large is more dynamic, and the Marauder Hunters have short range at 70, so they can't really do counter skirmishing either. And plus, Shield Breaker is just not that great of an ability anyways. And yeah, they just have 8 ammunition, which is so strange. A really, really weird thing. So that's going to be the worst unit on Norsca, and for the next one we have Bretonnia. So for the Bretonians, there's a couple really janky units on this roster. We have things like the Pegasus Knights, who did recently get buffed, and they're certainly better. But I think the worst unit on the roster is going to be the Field Trebuchets. Regular Field Trebuchets are inaccurate. They're just like giant targets. There's just something about them that just sucks. I can't really like put my finger on it, but I just think that like they're super inaccurate. I guess they're cheap, but you never see them. Like, I would rather use Pegasus Knights before a Field Trebuchet. Like, it's just something that you don't see often. It's just damage output seems lackluster. Its accuracy is lackluster, and I just don't think it's very good. Now, it's a close contender with Pegasus Knights in my opinion, but I still do think that the Field Trebuchet at the end of the day is going to be the worst unit. Now, next, guys, we have the Wood Elves, and for the Wood Elves, I think it's going to be the Treeman, the regular Treeman. So, what's funny about him is he's not like an absolute trash unit, but in accordance with the Wood Elf tacticianship and strategies, he's pretty bad. Like, oftentimes Wood Elves are going to be using Way Watchers or Wild Rider Alpha Strikes or things like that, and he just kind of like gets left in the dust. And as such, I think he's one of the more useless units. Now, the Treecan do have niches in some matchups if you want to have a very defensive build against like cav charges and things like that. But the Treeman is just like, he's just a mediocre big boy unit. But yeah, I don't know, just like low weapon strength, just somewhat okay durability with some physical resist, but he's just kind of a weaker unit in my opinion. And I don't think he jives at all with the Wood Elf strategy. Like if you look at all the infantry, they're all situationally okay. Same with all the missile units. Glade Guard can be good, Deepwood Scouts, Way Watchers, all the cav are pretty good. Blade Riders, Hawk Riders can be okay, Sisters of Thorn, even all the monsters like the Great Eagles situationally can be a niche at sniping out characters and things like that. But the Treeman, just doesn't really have a place here, and I do think he's one of the weaker units on the Wood Elf roster. As it pertains to multiplayer and campaign, he's probably obviously fine, but again, you're dealing with Amber in campaign, so have fun recruiting elite units. So that's going to be it for the Wood Elves, and next for the Beastmen. The Beastmen were kind of an interesting one, because looking over the Beastmen roster, I was like, you know what, none of these units are really that bad. Like, if we look here, all the infantry are situationally okay. Missile infantry, the raiders are good, all the cav units are good, their chariots aren't bad, their throwing axes are great, and pretty much most of their monsters, even the chaos spawn, which have had cost reductions and buffs, can be niche now. But of all these units, I think that the most useless are probably the dual wielding Minotaurs. So why would you take the dual wielding Minotaurs when you can take a freaking Minotaurs with shields? The silver shields are, people are going to bring missiles and sort of things to bring down lightly armored monsters against Beastmen. So I think bringing the Minotaurs with shields are just always better. Yeah, you're losing out on a bonus for his infantry, which, boo-hoo. Regular Minotaurs with shields will still hit very hard. Plus, they have 46 melee defense against 32 of the regular Minotaurs. And great weapons, of course, fill their niche against large monsters, so they're better objectively than the dual-wielding Minotaurs. But I do think that regular dual-wield Minotaurs are just probably one of the more, useless units on the roster that you're almost never going to see. Like, just take the shields. The melee defense oftentimes allows them to end up doing more damage because they last longer and they're not going to be dying from missiles as quickly. So yes, take the Minotaurs with shields. You won't regret it. And the worst unit for the Beastmen roster are the regular Minotaurs, in my humble opinion. So next and last, actually, are the Warriors of Chaos. So Chaos, this is an easy one. This is an old favorite from Warhammer 1, so Forsaken. Forsaken are just a god-awful unit. For the same cost, you could get Chaos Warriors, who honestly pack some pretty good punch, are durable, they have silver shields. Forsaken just die. They have a low model count at 60, they have like terrible defensive stats, they just get crumped by missiles, they get crumped by cav charges. And, I want them to be good, and on paper it seems like they should be, right? They have high speed, they hit hard with 58 weapon strength, but they just die so quick. Their low model count plus their low melee defense just means they're terrible. Now, I think if they got buffed up to like 75 models, they could actually be game changers. Like, they would have pretty good HP, and I think they could endure some of the beatings they take. But now for 750, I think they're a little bit overpriced. Perhaps lower them to 650, make them more of a kind of a horde unit you can pick, and maybe you'll see some play out of them. But even still, I think Forsaken are the worst unit on the Chaos roster. They're too squishy for the cost, and they just really just get whooped on. And that's really saying something, because Chaos Spawn for Chaos really aren't one of the better units. So I really do think that these Forsaken belong in the trash can. So guys, thanks again for joining. Hopefully you enjoyed going over the worst unit for all of these glorious factions. I think it was quite a bit of fun. And if there is a unit you guys want to see played, please in the comment section below, let me know your opinions. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you had different experiences? But more importantly, are there units here on this roster that you really want to see me try and make work? Because I think that's really fun. It was like the Bloated Corpse video, things like that. Just let me know, guys, and I'll come up with some builds. I'll try and make them work as best I can. And perhaps we'll discover that maybe they're not as bad as I perhaps once thought. So thanks again for joining, guys, and we will see you guys on the other side. Take care.